The housewarming party at Evervale Ridge was bathed in golden light, a celebration for my brother's new 4-bedroom mansion. "My son can do anything," my mother beamed, dismissing me as just an office worker. Later, in the marble kitchen, they slid a folder toward me. "Just sign these to help your brother with a little issue at work." I opened it and saw the truth. They wanted me to be the scapegoat for his fraud at my own company. My name is Eleanor Vale, but no one has called me that in years. I'm Ellie, at 32. I am the head of risk control for Harbor and Finch, a data corporation in the sprawling metropolis of North Alder. My job is to see the patterns others miss, to find the single dissonant note in a symphony of numbers, to understand that the ledger, in the end, never lies. It's a skill I honed not in a classroom, but at my own family's dinner table. Tonight, that dissonance was deafening. The party at my brother Mason's new house in Evervale Ridge was an ode to fabricated success. The air, thick with the scent of freshly sawn wood and the cloying perfume of white orchids, vibrated with the delicate chime of clinking champagne flutes. It was a sound I associated with closing deals, with success that was earned and quantifiable. Here, it felt hollow, a soundtrack for a play where I was the only one who hadn't memorized my lines. The house was a monument to modern excess, a 4-bedroom mansion with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out onto manicured lawns and a future that seemed as polished and inevitable as the Italian marble under our feet. Guests drifted through the open-plan living space, their voices a low, reverent hum as they admired the recessed lighting, the minimalist art, and the sheer, unapologetic scale of it all. My parents were the conductors of this symphony. My mother, Catherine, her laughter a little too loud, a little too brittle, held court by the quartz waterfall island in the kitchen. "Mason, my son, he's a true visionary," she declared to a captive audience of neighbors and distant relatives. "He sees opportunities no one else does, a real star at Harbor and Finch." She gestured vaguely in my direction, where I was standing near the French doors. "And Ellie works there too. She's our sensible one, so good with the details." The compliment was a perfectly crafted insult, a silken cord designed to tighten ever so slightly. In our family's mythology, Mason was the brilliant artist, the risk-taker, the creator. I was the technician who cleaned his brushes. My father, Richard, was worse. He stood with his arms slung around Mason's shoulders, his posture radiating a vicarious pride that was almost painful to watch. Mason, just 2 years my senior, looked every bit the part he was playing. Custom-tailored suit, a watch that cost more than my first car, and a smile that was both charming and utterly vacant. "To the financial genius of the family," my father boomed, raising his glass. The gesture was for the crowd, but his eyes found mine for a split second, a flicker of something that felt like a challenge. He was daring me to contradict the narrative, to point out the inconvenient facts I knew he was ignoring. I held his gaze and gave a small, neutral nod before turning to look out at the darkening garden. Throughout the evening, the subtle slights continued, falling like a persistent, corrosive drizzle. "Ellie, you're so organized. Could you just check if the caterers have everything they need?" my mother would ask, handing me a clipboard. "Ellie, dear, be a lamb and find another bottle of that Chardonnay. Mason's clients adore it." I was simultaneously a guest and a member of the staff, a ghost haunting the edges of my own family's celebration. The ultimate irony was that my actual job, my title as head of risk control, meant I held more institutional power at Harbor and Finch than Mason, a recently promoted senior investment analyst, could ever dream of. But here, in this house built on something, I was just Ellie, good with paperwork. As the hours wore on and the guests began to depart, their congratulations echoing in the cavernous space, the true purpose of the evening began to surface. The performative joy receded, replaced by a tense, focused energy. My father saw the last of the neighbors out, closing the heavy oak door with a decisive thud. My mother, her smile now a thin, painted line, turned to me. The warmth was gone from her eyes, replaced by a cold, transactional gleam. Ellie, a word in the kitchen, it wasn't a request. Mason was already there, leaning against the counter, avoiding my eyes. The vast, gleaming kitchen, which had felt so full of life an hour ago, was now silent and sterile, a perfect stage for an interrogation. My father stood by the door, blocking the only exit, a trap. My mother didn't waste time with pleasantries. She retrieved a thick manila envelope from a drawer and placed it on the marble countertop with a soft, definitive slap. The sound seemed to echo in the silence. "We need you to help the family," she said, her voice low and urgent. She pushed the envelope toward me. "It's just a small thing, a formality." My fingers felt cold as I reached for it. My mind, trained to assess risk, was already running through probabilities, connecting disparate points of data, Mason's sudden promotion, the whispers I'd heard in the office about his aggressive, high-risk strategies, the impossible speed with which this house had materialized out of nowhere. I flipped the metal clasp and slid the contents out. It wasn't a small thing. It was a meticulously prepared package of corporate poison. The top document was a power of attorney, granting me authority over a specific subset of Mason's client accounts. Beneath it were several client data adjustment forms, already filled out. They were designed to reallocate funds, to move losses from a set of privileged accounts and spread them thinly across 100 others, where they would appear as minor, insignificant rounding errors, and at the bottom of each page, a single, damning line awaited my signature under my title, Eleanor Vale, Head of Risk Control. I felt the blood drain from my face. They weren't just asking me to cover for him. They were asking me to use the very authority I had earned, the trust the company had placed in me, to legitimize his fraud. My name, my reputation, would be the stamp of approval, the firewall that would protect him when the numbers inevitably imploded. I looked up from the documents, my gaze sweeping over the three of them. My father, his jaw set and resolute. My mother, her expression a terrifying blend of pleading and command. And Mason, who finally met my eyes, his own filled not with remorse, but with a kind of petulant entitlement, as if I were the one being unreasonable. "The internal audit is tomorrow morning," my father said, his voice flat and hard. He had dropped all pretense of this being a simple favor. This was an order. "If you love your brother, if you care about this family, you'll sign it," my mother added, her voice softening into a weapon of emotional blackmail. "It's just moving some numbers around. Ellie, no one gets hurt. It protects him. It protects all of this." She waved a hand, encompassing the magnificent, fraudulent room. I didn't answer. I walked slowly to the wide glass window that overlooked the back patio and the shimmering, illuminated swimming pool. The entire house, the clean lines, the glowing windows, the sheer, imposing weight of it, was reflected on the polished surface of the black marble countertop, and there, superimposed over the reflection of the house, was my own image, pale and translucent, a ghost in their machine. They were asking me to erase myself, to become a signature on a page that would secure their reality while invalidating my own. I turned back to them. The air was thick with their expectation. I let the silence stretch, a tactic I often used in contentious meetings. Let the other side fill the void. Let them reveal their weaknesses. Finally, I spoke, my voice quiet but clear in the unnaturally silent room. "What bought this house?" The question hung in the air, simple and lethal. It wasn't about the documents anymore. It was about the motive, the prize, the original sin. My mother's lips pressed together into a white line. My father's face, which had been a mask of paternal authority, went completely blank. He had no answer. And Mason broke eye contact instantly. His gaze dropped to the floor, to his gleaming, hand-stitched Italian leather shoes. He stared at them as if they held the secrets of the universe. Two perfect, polished symbols of the success he had stolen. The silence that followed was my answer. They knew. They all knew. A slow smile spread across my face. It wasn't warm or kind. It felt sharp in my own muscles, thin as a razor's edge. I carefully slid the documents back into the manila envelope, my movements deliberate and precise. I held their gazes, one by one, letting them see the shift, the transfer of power that had just taken place in their pristine marble kitchen. "I'll review it," I said, my voice as cool and smooth as the countertop beneath my fingers. I picked up the envelope. At the office, driving away from Evervale Ridge, the manila envelope sat on the passenger seat like a bomb. Its weight seemed to press down on the suspension of my car, a tangible anchor to a lifetime of carefully curated fiction. The slick modern lines of my brother's mansion receded in the rearview mirror, its warm golden lights shrinking until they were just another constellation in the suburban sky. But the image was burned into my mind, a perfect representation of the Vale family story, bright, expensive, and a complete fabrication, a perfect family, on paper. Our story began in Briar Oaks, a town so picturesque it felt like a movie set. White picket fences, manicured lawns, and a quiet, oppressive sense of order. From the outside, we were the town's poster family. My father, a respected regional manager at a mid-tier bank, my mother, a pillar of the PTA, and their 2 children, Mason, the golden boy, and me, his shadow. The centerpiece of our home was a towering glass and mahogany cabinet in the living room. It wasn't for fine china. It was a shrine to Mason. Every shelf was crammed with his achievements: soccer trophies, debate team plaques, a gilded award for Young Entrepreneur of the Year from the local Chamber of Commerce for a lawn mowing business he'd run for a single summer. My accomplishments were not the kind that could be cast in bronze. There were no trophies for acing the SATs, no plaques for teaching yourself to code, no medals for being the quiet, observant one who saw everything. The divergence became a chasm after high school. I earned a full academic scholarship to study data analytics at a prestigious university. It was my escape, a world of logic and reason far removed from the arbitrary emotional calculus of my family. My parents were pleased, in a detached sort of way. It was a practical achievement that cost them nothing. For Mason, however, they cashed in their retirement savings, not for an education, but for an investment. They gave him the money to start a small, private investment fund. Mason has a feel for the market. My father would explain to anyone who would listen, you have to nurture that kind of instinct. They were planting a seed in what they believed was fertile ground, while I was a wildflower expected to grow on my own in the rocky soil by the side of the road. Dinner conversations were case studies in this disparity. The talk always revolved around Mason's latest play. He'd speak in broad, confident strokes about market trends and volatile tech stocks, and my parents would hang on his every word, their faces a mixture of awe and pride. My work, which involved building complex predictive models and safeguarding billions of dollars in client data for one of the largest corporations in the country, was relegated to the background. "How's the paperwork, Ellie?" my father would ask, turning to me as an afterthought. Keeping those files in order, my job, my career, was dismissed as glorified clerical work, the unglamorous backstage machinery that allowed the real star, Mason, to shine. We both ended up at Harbor and Finch, but our arrivals could not have been more different. I entered through the front door, armed with a degree and a resume full of quantifiable successes. I started in an entry-level position and worked my way up, meticulously, relentlessly, for 8 years. My promotion to head of risk control was the culmination of long nights, high-pressure projects, and a proven track record of saving the company from financial disasters. When I told my parents, my mother's response was a lukewarm, "Oh, that's wonderful, dear. At least it's a stable position." Stability was the best they could hope for me. Mason didn't enter through the front door. He was ushered into a side entrance, directly into the executive wing. My father, it turned out, had an old college acquaintance on the board of directors, a few phone calls, a leveraged friendship, and suddenly Mason was hired as an investment analyst, bypassing the rigorous, multi-stage interview process that I and everyone else had endured. He was introduced to the leadership team not as a new hire, but as a prodigy, my father's glowing recommendation paving his way. His success was preordained, his path smoothed and gilded by connections I was never offered. My family's obsession was with the optics of success, with the perfect photograph that could be captioned and shared. Our lives were a series of staged moments. There's a photo from the Harbor and Finch annual charity gala 2 years ago. Mason is in the center, laughing with the CEO, a flute of champagne in his hand. My father had orchestrated the introduction. I'm in the photo too. If you look closely, I'm on the far edge of the frame, my face partially obscured, holding a platter of hors d'oeuvres because my mother had insisted I help the catering staff out for a moment. In every picture, my role was functional, supportive, ancillary. I was the one holding the cake so Mason could be photographed blowing out the candles. This philosophy, that my purpose was to support his, was something my mother had instilled in me from the beginning. I remember once, in high school, I discovered Mason had copied a major history paper of mine. When I confronted him, my mother overheard. She didn't get angry at him. She pulled me aside. "Family is a team, Eleanor," she had whispered, her grip tight on my arm. "Sometimes one player needs to help another for the team to win. Loyalty to your brother is more important than any school rule." Her worldview was terrifyingly simple. Morality was fluid, but blood was absolute. The rules of the outside world, ethics, laws, regulations, were mere suggestions, easily discarded if they conflicted with the family's primary objective, the advancement of Mason Vale. So I learned to be silent. I learned to watch, to listen, and to count. My affinity for data wasn't just a professional skill, it was a survival mechanism. While my family was busy constructing their narrative of success, I was in the background, collecting facts. I counted every dollar they spent on Mason's ventures, while I paid for my textbooks with money from part-time jobs. I counted every interruption at the dinner table when I tried to speak about my work, only to be cut off by Mason's latest anecdote, and I remembered every dismissive comment, every condescending smile, every time I was made to feel like a supporting character in my own life. Each one was a scratch, a small imperfection on the flawless veneer of our family portrait, and I never forgot a single one. The night of the housewarming was the final data point I needed. Before the guests left, my father insisted on a photo, not in the house, but in the driveway. Mason had just leased a new sports car, a sleek silver machine that looked like it was breaking the speed limit even while parked. He leaned against it, the embodiment of effortless wealth. My parents stood on either side of him, beaming, their hands resting on the car's polished hood, as if to absorb some of its power. My mother turned to me. "Ellie, dear, can you hold my wrap? The lighting is much better without it." I stood a few feet away, just beyond the glow of the porch light, holding my mother's cashmere shawl. The camera on my father's phone flashed, capturing the perfect image, the brilliant sun, his proud parents, and their new symbol of triumph. I was not in the picture. My reflection was a faint, ghostly outline on the car's tinted window, a spectator to their manufactured joy. And in that moment, watching them pose for a lie that would soon be posted on social media for the world to admire, something inside me shifted. The years of silent accounting, of collecting scratches and slights, culminated in a single, cold point of clarity. They had spent my entire life building this frame, carefully curating every element inside it to tell the story they wanted. They had just tried to use me, my career, and my integrity as the final, reinforcing nail to hold it all together. They thought I was part of the scenery. They were wrong. I was the architect of a different kind of structure, one built on truth and unassailable data. As the flash faded, leaving spots in my eyes, I made a decision. I would not be the scapegoat that secured their false narrative. I would be the one who finally set the ledger straight. It was time to build a new frame. The next morning, the sterile, climate-controlled air of the Harbor and Finch headquarters on Candle Row was a welcome antidote to the cloying sweetness of my brother's house party. Here, there were no orchids, no champagne, no carefully constructed illusions. There was only data, housed in servers that hummed with a quiet, immutable truth. This was my sanctuary, my armory. The rules of this world were absolute, and I was one of their most dedicated enforcers. I bypassed my own spacious office and went directly to a secondary terminal in a secure analytics suite, a room with no windows and enhanced access protocols. I didn't want the digital breadcrumbs of this investigation to lead back to my primary workstation. It was a matter of professional hygiene. Logging in with my level 4 clearance, I felt the familiar sense of calm settle over me. The chaos of my family's emotional manipulation faded, replaced by the cool, clear logic of the system. My first query was a broad one. I pulled up the internal transaction logs for the entire wealth management division, a torrent of raw data that would be incomprehensible to an untrained eye. To me, it was a language I spoke fluently. I filtered the data stream, isolating all activities associated with Mason's user ID for the past fiscal quarter. The screen filled with thousands of lines of code, a digital biography of his every professional move. Then, I cross-referenced Mason's activity with the 3 client account numbers from the fraudulent documents he'd tried to make me sign. The names on the accounts were old, established clients of the firm, people whose trust was the bedrock of our reputation. As I suspected, the pattern was immediately obvious. There was a series of small, seemingly insignificant service fee withdrawals and portfolio rebalancing debits from these 3 accounts. But the corresponding credits were not going to the firm's holding accounts. They were being diverted, routed through a complex series of internal transfers designed to look like standard operational fund movements. The ledger was already telling a story. Now I needed to find out where it ended. The final destination of these microtransactions was a single, consolidated corporate account, an account that did not belong to Harbor and Finch. My fingers flew across the keyboard. Pulling the external routing number, it was a dead end. A ghost account with no listed owner, designed for temporary holding, but they had made a mistake. They had to move the money out eventually. My next step was to find the trigger for the fraud. I ran a chronological analysis, plotting the dates and amounts of the fund transfers on a timeline. Then, on a separate screen, I pulled up public property records for Evervale Ridge. I located the deed for Mason's new mansion, the date of the down payment, a substantial 7-figure sum, coincided perfectly with the largest consolidation of diverted funds in the ghost account. The timing wasn't just suspicious, it was a confession written in dollars and cents. The 4-bedroom mansion wasn't bought with Mason's genius. It was purchased with stolen client money. Now I had the motive and the method. What I needed was the mechanism. The money had to be laundered to be used. I began searching for any new vendors or corporate partners. Mason had onboarded in the last 6 months. My risk control software flagged one immediately. Blue Spire Solutions. It was a consulting firm registered just 4 months ago, with no discernible business history, no web presence, and a single, vaguely worded contract for strategic market analysis. It was a classic shell corporation. A deeper dive into the firm's payment ledger revealed its true purpose. Harbor and Finch had paid Blue Spire Solutions a hefty consulting fee, authorized by Mason. In turn, Blue Spire's account showed a series of large outgoing payments. One was to a high-end German kitchen designer, another was to a bespoke furniture maker in Milan, a third was to a landscape architect specializing in infinity pools. All of the invoices listed the delivery address as Mason's new property in Evervale Ridge. He wasn't just covering his tracks, he was furnishing his house. The final piece of the puzzle required me to step outside Harbor and Finch's systems, using a corporate intelligence tool we subscribe to. I pulled the state registration documents for Blue Spire Solutions. The listed director was a name I didn't recognize, likely a hired proxy, but the corporate bank account records were more revealing. To open a business account, you need signatories. There were 2 names listed with full withdrawal and transfer rights. The first was Mason Vale. The second was Catherine Vale, my mother. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. It wasn't shock, but a grim, weary confirmation of something I had always known on some subconscious level. My mother's belief in family loyalty above all else wasn't just a philosophy. It was a business model. She wasn't just an accomplice after the fact. She was a co-conspirator, a signatory on the very account used to wash the stolen money. The perfect family matriarch was a money launderer. I returned to our internal network. The final piece of evidence I needed was proof of intent, something to counter the inevitable defense that this was all a series of elaborate clerical errors. I accessed the archived email server and ran a keyword search within Mason's sent items: audit, adjust, internal, review. It didn't take long to find it. An email sent 3 days ago to a junior analyst on his team. The subject line was innocuous: quick follow-up. The body of the message was a masterpiece of corporate doublespeak. Per our discussion, Mason had written, could you please process those routine periodic adjustments we talked about before the end of the day? Just want to ensure our client records are fully aligned ahead of the Q3 internal review. It was the smoking gun, a vague, undocumented discussion, an urgent request for adjustments with no specifics, timed perfectly before the internal audit my father had mentioned. It was a clear, unambiguous order to falsify records, delivered with just enough plausible deniability to protect himself if the analyst questioned it. My work was almost done. Methodically, I began to build my case file. I downloaded every transaction log, every property deed, every invoice from the interior decorators. I saved the corporate registration for Blue Spire Solutions and the bank signatory records. I exported a copy of Mason's incriminating email. Each file was a brick in the wall I was building around them. For each digital file, I ran a SHA-256 checksum, generating a unique cryptographic hash. This created a digital fingerprint for each piece of evidence, proving it had not been altered from the moment I saved it. I compiled everything into a single, encrypted container file. Then, I opened a secure connection to the firm's highest-level archive, the immutable storage vault maintained by the Global Compliance Department. It was a digital black box. Once data was submitted, it could not be altered or deleted by anyone, not even the CEO. It was a one-way trip. I uploaded the container file, the progress bar filled, and with a quiet click, my evidence was permanently sealed. The trap was set. Now, I could act officially. I navigated to the internal audit scheduling system. As head of risk control, I had the authority to initiate priority reviews. I scheduled a surprise operational audit of Mason's entire client portfolio, effective immediately. The reason cited: data integrity anomalies detected during routine system analysis. My final step was to contain the threat. I filed a formal request with IT security to place a temporary, full-privilege suspension on Mason's user account. The justification: potential unauthorized access and data exfiltration risk. It wasn't a lie. He had authorized access, but he was using it to exfiltrate funds. His access would be cut off within the hour, preventing him from seeing the audit request and attempting to delete the emails or alter the transaction logs. He was now locked out of his own crime scene. Before logging off the secure terminal, I opened a private, encrypted work journal I kept on a separate server. It was a place for notes too sensitive for any official record. My fingers paused over the keyboard for a moment, then typed a single, declarative sentence. The truth starts here. I shut the system down. The hum of the servers seemed to grow louder in the silence. I walked back to my office and turned on the high-volume printer. For 10 minutes, the machine whirred and clicked, spitting out page after page of evidence, the warm paper stacked up in the tray, spreadsheets, bank statements, emails, charts with arrows showing the illicit flow of money. It was the complete, unvarnished story of their greed. I took the stack of paper, squared it up perfectly, and slid it into a simple, unlabeled black binder. It was heavy in my hands, a solid, tangible object, It was everything the manila envelope they had given me was not. It was factual, it was complete, and it was the truth, and I was going to make them read every single page. The following evening, I drove back to Evervale Ridge. The house was no longer blazing with the golden light of a party. It was subdued, a few select lights casting long, lonely shadows across the immaculate lawn. It looked like a photograph from an architectural magazine, a perfect and silent monument to a life I was about to dismantle. In my passenger seat, the black binder felt cool and solid, a repository of cold, hard facts in a world built on convenient fictions. I didn't ring the doorbell. My father had texted me an hour earlier. "The side door is open. We need to finish our conversation." It was a summons, not an invitation. I walked up the stone path, my heels clicking with a steady, unhurried rhythm. The air was still and smelled of damp earth and money. I found them exactly where I knew they would be, staged in the same marble kitchen as the night before. It was a tableau of desperate authority. My father stood by the island, his arms crossed, his face a mask of stern impatience. My mother sat at the small breakfast table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, a posture of strained composure, and Mason, my brother, paced restlessly by the glass doors, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. He was radiating a nervous energy that was a stark contrast to his usual air of effortless superiority. On the gleaming marble island, placed dead center, was the manila envelope from the previous night. Its contents were fanned out slightly, the signature lines on the documents exposed and waiting. It was a lure, a piece of bait left in a very expensive trap. They saw the black binder under my arm, and a flicker of uncertainty crossed my father's face. But he quickly suppressed it. They thought I had come to negotiate terms. They thought this was still a family matter. I walked to the island and placed my binder next to their envelope. The stark black of my binder against the pale manila of theirs was a visual representation of the forces at play, their flimsy, desperate proposal versus my comprehensive, unassailable truth. "I've reviewed the documents," I began, my voice even and devoid of emotion. I looked directly at Mason, who had stopped pacing to watch me. "And I'm prepared to sign them." A collective sigh of relief seemed to pass through the room, a barely audible release of tension. My mother's shoulders relaxed. My father gave a curt, satisfied nod. Mason managed a weak, triumphant smirk. They thought they had won. I let the moment hang in the air for a second, allowing them to savor their false victory. Then, I delivered the first cut. "I just have one question first," I continued, my tone still mild, almost conversational. I paused, then looked Mason straight in the eye. "You just need to explain to me what Blue Spire Solutions is, and I'll sign." The name landed in the silent kitchen like a grenade. Mason's smirk vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed incomprehension. My father's face went rigid, the color draining from it, and my mother, my unflappable, composed mother, flinched as if I had struck her. In the polished, dark surface of the window, I could see their three reflections, their faces frozen in identical masks of sheer, unadulterated panic. They knew the name, and they knew that I was not supposed to. I reached into my bag and took out a pen, a simple black ballpoint from the office supply cabinet. I placed it carefully on top of the power of attorney form, parallel to the signature line. They all watched the pen as if it were a venomous snake. They didn't notice that I had not removed the cap. While their attention was fixed on the pen, I casually placed my phone on the counter beside my binder, my thumb swiping across the screen. A small, discreet red icon began to pulse in the corner. The audio recording, fully compliant with state one-party consent laws, was active. "What? What is that?" Mason stammered, his voice a hoarse whisper. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Blue Spire Solutions," I repeated, enunciating each syllable with precision. "The consulting firm, the one that paid for your kitchen renovation, and the Italian furniture, and the infinity pool. I just need you to clarify its role in your portfolio strategy, for my own due diligence. as head of risk control. I'm sure you understand. My title, spoken aloud in this room, had a new and terrifying weight. I wasn't just Ellie, the helpful sister. I was a corporate officer with a fiduciary duty, and I was invoking it. My mother found her voice first. It was sharp, laced with a fury born of fear. "This is ridiculous. Eleanor, it's an internal business matter. It's just a procedural transfer to a vendor. No one is being hurt by this. This is about protecting your brother." "Is it, Mom?" I asked, my voice still quiet. "Because it looks a lot like fraud and money laundering, and I can assure you, the SEC tends to believe people get hurt by those things. Specifically, the clients whose money paid for all this." That was when Mason broke. The pressure, the surprise, the dawning realization that I knew far more than he could have imagined. It was too much for his fragile ego to bear. He took a step forward, his hands clenched into fists, his face contorted in a snarl of desperation. "You don't get it," he hissed, his voice cracking. "You have to sign it. If you don't sign those papers, the internal audit will flag everything. They will trace the transfers for this house." He stopped, his eyes wide, realizing what he had just said. He had confessed. He had explicitly linked the fraudulent documents to the audit and the purchase of the house. He had just handed me the final, irrefutable piece of my case, a recorded admission of intent. The silence that followed was absolute. All the air seemed to have been sucked out of the room. My mother stared at him in horror. My father looked as though the floor had just dropped out from under him. Slowly, deliberately, I reached out and picked up the capped pen from the document. I clicked the end, then clicked it again. Retracting the non-existent tip, I placed it back in my bag. Then, I closed the black binder with a soft, definitive thud. "Thank you," I said, my voice calm and final. That's all I needed. I picked up my phone and my binder, turning to leave. It was my father who moved first. He lunged forward, not toward me, but toward the window overlooking the neighboring house. "Close the blinds," he whispered frantically, his voice a choked rasp. "For God's sake, Ellie, what if the neighbors hear you?" I stopped and looked at him, truly looked at him. Even now, with his son's career and freedom hanging by a thread, his first instinct was to worry about appearances, not about the crime, not about the victims, not about the moral ruin of his family. He was worried about what the people next door might think. They were so consumed by their own fiction that they couldn't see the reality that was about to crush them. They thought I was making a threat. They had no idea that I had already acted. The audit was already in motion. His user account was already suspended. The evidence was already secured in a place they could never touch. "They can't hear anything, Dad," I said, a profound and weary sadness seeping into my voice. "The damage is already done." I walked out of the kitchen, leaving the three of them standing frozen amidst the silent, gleaming appliances. I didn't look back. The air in the house seemed to have changed. The faint, pleasant scent of the plug-in air freshener, something like linen and sky, was still there, but it was now mingled with something else. It was the acrid, metallic scent of pure, undiluted panic. I left them to drown in it, closing the side door quietly behind me, the sound of the latch clicking into place like the closing of a tomb. Monday morning at Harbor and Finch was a masterclass in psychological warfare. I had expected panicked phone calls, a barrage of pleading texts, perhaps even an unannounced visit from my mother. Instead, I was met with a chillingly audacious public performance. They had decided that if private pressure wouldn't work, public humiliation was the next logical step. It began with a team meeting announcement from Mason, or rather, from Mason's designated deputy, since his own network access was, to his mounting fury, still suspended. The junior analyst who read the memo aloud sounded nervous, his voice wavering as he relayed the news. "Mason is pleased to announce a new strategic initiative for our key client portfolio. He will be leading this project and has asked his sister, Ellie Vale, to lend her considerable expertise in a supporting role." A few heads in the open plan office turned my way. I kept my expression placid, offering a small, non-committal smile to those who caught my eye, a supporting role. The language was deliberate, a public demotion designed to put me in my place. He was framing me as his subordinate, using corporate structure to reinforce the family hierarchy they so desperately wanted to maintain. But that was just the opening salvo. An hour later, the company-wide email landed in every employee's inbox. The subject line read, "A new synergy, family and future at Harbor and Finch." It was a work of art, a nauseating blend of corporate buzzwords and weaponized sentimentality. "Team," it began, "I am thrilled to announce an exciting new chapter for our division. As we push the boundaries of innovation, it is often the bonds we share that provide our greatest strength. To that end, I am personally spearheading a vital strategic project and am honored to have my sister, Ellie Vale, our esteemed head of risk control, working alongside me. It is a testament to the values of Harbor and Finch that siblings can unite their talents to drive our company forward. We are not just colleagues, we are family, working in concert to create a new legacy." It was signed by Mason, of course, sent via his assistant's account. It was brilliant in its wickedness. He had wrapped himself in the flag of family values, painting me as his partner in this wholesome, inspiring endeavor. To the outside world, it looked like a heartwarming story of sibling collaboration. To me, it was a public threat. He was lashing me to him, making any move against him look like a personal, familial betrayal in front of the entire company. He was daring me to refuse, to be the cold, ungrateful sister who rejected her brother's magnanimous gesture. I let the email sit in my inbox for exactly 30 minutes, long enough to appear thoughtful but not hesitant. Then, I clicked Reply All. My response was brief, professional, and surgically precise. "Thank you, Mason. I look forward to contributing to the project's success. Please have your assistant coordinate with mine to schedule the strategic planning meeting. My calendar is open on Wednesday morning." I hit send. Across the office, I could see the email notification pop up on screens. It was a public acknowledgement, a seeming capitulation. I could almost feel the collective sigh of relief from my family. Wherever they were, they would read my polite, corporate-speak reply and believe they had me cornered. They had thrown down the gauntlet, and I had, to all appearances, meekly picked it up. But while my public self was playing the part of the compliant sister, my real work was happening in the silent, encrypted channels of the company's infrastructure. My first action was to access the corporate compliance hotline, a third-party service designed for complete anonymity. I filed a formal report. I didn't use my name. I posed as a concerned mid-level employee who had overheard conversations and observed suspicious account activity related to Mason Vale's portfolio. I provided just enough specific information, a few account numbers, the name Blue Spire Solutions, the timing of the mansion purchase, to trigger an immediate, high-priority investigation. This created a separate, independent threat vector. Now, even if they somehow managed to neutralize me, another, more anonymous process was already in motion, a time bomb that could not be stopped. My next step was a call to the General Counsel's office. "Marcus, it's Ellie Vale," I said, keeping my voice level. "I need to book a conference room for a sensitive internal review on Wednesday morning at 10. Please ensure a member of your team is present to observe and take notes. I'll need Rivengate." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Rivengate was the nickname for the main boardroom on the executive floor, a fishbowl of a room encased in floor-to-ceiling glass. Nothing that happened in Rivengate was private. Booking it for an internal review was the corporate equivalent of firing a flare gun. "Of course, Ellie," Marcus said slowly, the question hanging unspoken in his voice. "I'll have someone there." The trap was now being set on two fronts, the official and the deeply personal. My family, emboldened by my apparent compliance, made their final, desperate move. An official meeting invitation appeared in my calendar for Wednesday at 10. It was for the strategic planning session. The attendee list was standard: Mason, myself, a few key analysts, and then, at the bottom, 2 additional names: Mr. Richard Vale, Honorary Advisor, and Mrs. Catherine Vale, Honorary Advisor. I stared at the screen, a cold, dark amusement rising in me. It was so transparent, so pathetically theatrical. They were going to bring our parents into a corporate boardroom. They were going to make me look my mother and father in the eye, in front of my colleagues, and challenge their narrative. Their plan was to turn a business meeting into a family intervention, using their parental authority and the specter of public shame as their final weapons. They truly believed they could emotionally blackmail me into signing those documents on a corporate stage. I buzzed my assistant, a sharp, efficient woman named Clara. Clara, for the Wednesday meeting in Rivengate, a few things. Please ensure the main overhead projector is calibrated and ready. Also, I want a certified stenographer present to produce a full, verbatim transcript of the proceedings. It's a formal review. A stenographer? Clara asked, her surprise evident. Understood. And what should I list as the official meeting title on the agenda? I leaned back in my chair, looking out the window at the cold, impassive skyline of North Alder. The final piece was falling into place. I was not attending Mason's strategy session. They were, unknowingly, attending mine. Call it an integrity review, I said. The silence on the other end of the intercom was profound. The name was a declaration of war. That evening, as I prepared for the following day, I laid out my materials on my dining room table. The black binder, thick with its damning evidence, was the centerpiece. Beside it, I placed the small digital voice recorder containing Mason's confession, and next to that, a single, crisp white envelope. It was perfectly blank, with no name or address. Inside was not a document, but an object, a small, silver key. It was my master key to the off-site facility that housed the physical servers for the immutable compliance archive. It was a symbol of the one thing they couldn't fight, the permanent, unalterable record of their crimes. I was bringing the evidence, the confession, and the key to the prison that held the truth. They were bringing my parents. It was not going to be a fair fight. Wednesday morning arrived with the cold, crystalline clarity of a day of judgment. When I walked into Rivengate at 10 o'clock sharp, the scene was exactly as I had pictured it, a perfectly set stage for a corporate execution. The boardroom was a jewel box of steel and glass, overlooking the city from the 40th floor. The immense, polished obsidian table was so reflective it looked like a dark, still river, mirroring the track lighting on the ceiling in a long, unbroken line, like a runway leading to an inevitable destination. My family was already there, a united front of misplaced confidence. Mason stood at the head of the table, testing the clicker for the projector, a picture of a young, dynamic executive about to unveil his latest masterpiece. My father and mother were seated to his right, in the chairs typically reserved for senior partners. They were dressed in their Sunday best, playing the part of honorary advisors with a solemn dignity that was utterly farcical. They nodded at me coolly as I entered, a gesture meant to convey that they were in control here, that this was their arena. Also present were Marcus Thorne, the firm's general counsel, and, to my family's visible surprise, Arthur Sterling, the chairman of the board. Sterling's presence was a quiet earthquake. He was a legend in the industry, a man who rarely attended divisional meetings. His being here signaled that this was no ordinary strategy session. He sat at the far end of the table, his face impassive, giving nothing away. A certified stenographer was setting up her equipment discreetly in a corner, and a junior lawyer from Marcus's team sat beside him, a blank legal pad at the ready. I took my seat opposite my parents, placing the black binder squarely in front of me. I nodded to Sterling and Marcus. "Thank you for joining us." Sterling gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod in return. "Vale, proceed." Mason, momentarily thrown by the chairman's presence but too arrogant to be truly deterred, launched into his presentation. The first slide flashed onto the massive screen at the end of the room. Project Constellation, a synergistic data consolidation strategy. It was meaningless corporate word salad, designed to impress and obfuscate. He spoke with a practiced, easy charm, his voice filling the room as he outlined a vague but ambitious plan to leverage key client assets for next-generation growth opportunities. My parents watched him with rapt attention, their faces shining with pride. They were witnessing the performance of a lifetime, the validation of all their investment in their golden boy. Mason clicked through a series of slides filled with complex-looking but ultimately empty charts. Then, he arrived at the heart of his presentation. "And to initiate phase 1 of this strategy," he announced, his voice resonating with false gravity, "we require an alignment of certain legacy portfolios. It's a standard procedural matter, a simple consolidation of assets to create the necessary liquidity for the project. Ellie, as head of risk control, has the relevant documents for sign-off." He looked directly at me, a confident, challenging glint in his eyes. He clicked the remote, and the final slide appeared. It was a scanned image of the power of attorney form, the one they had tried to force on me in his kitchen, with a large, yellow arrow pointing to the empty signature line. He was actually projecting the fraudulent document in front of the chairman of the board. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. "So, Ellie," Mason said, his voice smooth as silk, "if you would be so kind as to provide your authorization, we can formally kick off this exciting new chapter for Harbor and Finch." He held out a pen to me across the table. It was a public coronation, and my signature was to be the final act of my submission. My father leaned forward slightly, a look of stern expectation on his face. My mother gave me a small, tight smile that was more of a command than an encouragement. I didn't take the pen. Instead, I stood up slowly. The room was silent, all eyes on me. I walked to the head of the table, my footsteps echoing softly on the polished floor. Mason looked confused, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. "What are you doing?" he whispered. "Just a technical clarification," I said calmly. I reached the console and unplugged his laptop's HDMI cable. I took a small, black USB drive from my pocket, the kind with military-grade encryption, and plugged it into the port. A new desktop image filled the screen. Then, I opened a single file. The title slide of Project Constellation vanished. It was replaced by 5 stark white words on a black background. The Blue Spire Solutions Cash Flow. A collective gasp went through the room. Mason froze, his hands still outstretched. Holding the pen, my father's jaw went slack. My mother's smile dissolved as if wiped away with acid. I clicked the remote. The next slide appeared. It was a flowchart, simple, brutal, and clear. On the left were the logos of the 3 prestigious client accounts. A thick red arrow led from them to a box in the center labeled Internal Ghost Account. From there, another red arrow pointed to a box labeled with the Blue Spire Solutions logo. And from that final box, a cascade of smaller arrows pointed to a series of images on the right. A photograph of the German kitchen in Mason's house, a picture of the Italian sofa in his living room, and a final, damning aerial shot of the entire 4-bedroom mansion in Evervale Ridge. "As you can see, Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice steady and clear, addressing the chairman directly. "The funds for Project Constellation have already been allocated. They were used to purchase and furnish my brother's new home." Before anyone could speak, before the shock in the room could coalesce into words, I pressed the next button on the remote. This time, there was no image, only an audio file. I had connected my phone to the room's sound system. The tinny, slightly distorted sound of a recording filled the pristine, soundproofed boardroom. Mason's voice, raw and desperate, echoed from the speakers. "You have to sign it. If you don't sign those papers, the internal audit will flag everything. They will trace the transfers for this house." The recording ended. The silence that crashed down in its wake was heavier and more profound than any sound. It was the sound of a life imploding. I looked at my family. My father was ashen, his face a grotesque mask of disbelief. My mother's hand was pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide with a horror that was finally, terrifyingly real. And Mason was staring at the obsidian table, his hand resting on its surface. He began to tap a single finger against the polished stone. Tap, 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 a frantic, uncontrolled rhythm, the only sound in the dead silent room. He kept tapping until his fingernail was white from the pressure. I walked back to my seat. I picked up the crisp, white envelope and walked to the end of the table where the chairman sat. I placed it gently on the table in front of him. He looked from the envelope to my face, his expression unreadable. "What is this?" Sterling asked, his voice a low rumble. "That, I replied, is the key to the immutable storage archive where a complete, unalterable record of every transaction, every invoice, and every email related to this fraud is permanently stored. The data is hashed and time-stamped. It cannot be erased." Marcus Thorne, the general counsel, leaned forward and nodded slowly to the chairman. His face was grim. "Mr. Chairman," he said, his voice formal and resolute, "in light of this presentation, I must recommend the immediate and indefinite suspension of Mr. Mason Vale. Pending a full internal and external investigation, we need to secure his files and notify the regulatory authorities immediately." That was when my mother broke. The sound she made was a strangled sob, a mix of fury and despair. She stood up, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. Her eyes, filled with tears of rage, were locked on me. "You did this," she hissed, her voice trembling. "To your own brother, to your own family. You've destroyed us." I met her gaze without flinching. The years of slights, of being overlooked, of being the family's resident ghost, had forged a core of steel inside me. I felt no triumph, only a great, sad finality. "No," I said, my voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the silent room. "I'm saving the family, from prison." I turned away from her, walked back to my place at the table, and picked up the black binder. I closed the cover. The soft thud of the binder closing sounded like a gavel, like a final judgment being rendered. It sounded like the lid of a coffin. The aftermath of the boardroom meeting was not a loud explosion, but the swift, silent shearing of a rotten support beam. The collapse began almost immediately, unfolding in a series of sterile, digital notifications that landed in my inbox with the cold finality of a guillotine. The first was a carbon-copied email from the bank's corporate fraud division to our general counsel. Subject: Account freeze, Blue Spire Solutions. The body of the message was brief. A string of account numbers and legal boilerplate confirming that all assets had been seized pending investigation. Just like that, the wellspring of their lavish lifestyle was capped. The money was gone, trapped in the amber of due process. The second email, forwarded from our legal department, was from a law firm representing the Milanese furniture designer. With terse, unforgiving language, they announced the immediate termination of their contract with Mr. Mason Vale. Citing material breach and non-payment, the custom-designed pieces, which had likely been sailing across the Atlantic in a shipping container, would now be recalled, their journey diverted before they could ever grace the floors of the house bought with stolen money. One by one, the threads of their beautiful lie were being snipped. That night, driven by a clinical curiosity, I opened my laptop and navigated to my brother's social media profile. It was a digital monument to himself, a carefully curated gallery of success. There were photos of him on sailboats, at exclusive restaurants, shaking hands with people who looked important. And until yesterday, the featured post at the very top of his page had been a triumphant, professionally lit photograph of the mansion in Evervale Ridge. The caption had read, "The next chapter begins. Hard work pays off." Now there was just a blank space. The post had been deleted. It wasn't archived or hidden. It was gone. An admission of guilt in the stark, white void it left behind. The digital proof of his hard work had been erased in a panicked flurry of clicks, but its absence was more conspicuous than the post itself had ever been. The physical world soon followed the digital, the quiet. Manicured streets of Evervale Ridge were disturbed by the arrival of an unfamiliar vehicle. A discreet, dark sedan with government plates parked in front of Mason's house for a full day. The neighbors, whose approval my parents so desperately craved, began to whisper. Their text chains and neighborhood watch forums lit up with speculation. The story of the brilliant young financier was being rewritten in real time, replaced by a more sordid tale of auditors and investigations. The foundation of their social standing was crumbling. Late on Thursday, my phone buzzed with a message from an unsaved number. I knew it was Mason's. He had likely bought a burner phone, a pathetic attempt at spycraft. The message was short, steeped in a self-pity that was almost more offensive than his arrogance had been. "You win. Is this enough for you?" I stared at the words. He still didn't understand. He saw this as a game, a sibling rivalry that I had finally won. He couldn't conceive of a world where actions were driven by principle rather than by a desire to dominate. He saw my choices not as a defense of the law or the company, but as a personal attack on him. He was blind to the idea that this was never about him being brought low, but about the truth being raised up. My fingers hovered over the screen. I typed a reply, the words forming with cold, hard clarity. "It is enough when the truth can stand on its own." I looked at the sentence, a perfect encapsulation of my motives. Then, with a decisive motion, I deleted it. I would not engage. I would not explain. My actions were my statement. Sending that message would be an admission that we were still in a conversation, that his opinion of me still mattered. It did not. I blocked the number and put the phone down. The following morning, I was called into a meeting with the head of Human Resources and Marcus Thorne from Legal. The mood was somber. They officially informed me that Mason Vale's employment with Harbor and Finch had been terminated, effective immediately. Then came the offer I had been expecting. "Ellie," the HR director said, her tone cautious, "in light of the leadership vacuum, the board has approved a proposal for you to assume interim oversight of the wealth management division. You would be taking over Mason's team and portfolio during this transitional period." It was the ultimate corporate victory, the final, perfect revenge, to be handed the keys to his kingdom, to become the master of the domain he had built through deceit. My parents' golden boy would be replaced by the daughter they had dismissed as an administrator. I could picture the look on their faces when they heard the news. I let the offer hang in the air for a moment, savoring the irony. Then I gave them my answer. "Thank you for the board's confidence," I said, my voice steady. "But I must respectfully decline the position." Both of them looked stunned. Marcus leaned forward. "Ellie, you're the most qualified person to stabilize the team. You know the systems. You know the clients." "My value to this company isn't in managing a single team," I interrupted gently. "It's in ensuring that what happened with that team can never happen again, anywhere in this firm. The problem wasn't just one person. It was a system with vulnerabilities he was able to exploit. We don't need a new manager. We need a new immune system." I pushed a single-page document across the table. It was a proposal I had drafted the night before. At the top was a title for a new role, one that had never existed at Harbor and Finch. "I'm not interested in being an interim supervisor," I said. "I am, however, interested in becoming this company's first director of corporate integrity, a permanent, senior-level role with independent authority, reporting directly to the board. My mandate would be to proactively audit for fraud, to stress-test our compliance systems, and to build a culture where ethical breaches are structurally impossible. I want to fix the disease, not just treat the symptoms." They read the proposal in silence. When they looked up, their expressions had changed from confusion to a deep, profound respect. They saw what I was doing. I was turning down personal power for institutional authority. I was choosing to be a guardian, not a ruler. Later that week, my new role was ratified in a special session of the board. I saw the official minutes afterward. Under the heading, New Resolutions, my name was listed. "Eleanor Vale is hereby appointed as Director of Corporate Integrity." Seeing my full name on that official document, a name tied to authority and responsibility, felt more real than any family photograph ever had. In those pictures, I was a ghost at the edge of the frame. In these minutes, I was the subject of the sentence. I was the one taking action. My phone rang that evening. The caller ID was Mother. I let it ring. Watching the name pulse on the screen, my own calendar was visible in the background, a grid of upcoming meetings. Forensic accounting debrief, ethics committee scoping session, conference with external counsel. She wanted to pull me back into the small, suffocating world of a family dinner, to relitigate feelings and loyalties, but I was no longer an inhabitant of that world. I was busy. I had work to do. I silenced the call and looked out my apartment window. Across the city, I could just make out the distant, affluent hills of Evervale Ridge. I imagined the house standing there in the twilight. The bright, triumphant golden lights that had once blazed from every window were gone. I pictured it now with just a few lamps on, casting a soft, weak glow, an apologetic light. The mansion was no longer a symbol of triumph. It was just a house, a quiet, lonely structure where a broken family sat in the dark, contemplating the true cost of their ambition. They finally broke their silence a week later, not with a phone call, but with a terse, formal text message from my father. Meet us, Dinah's Diner, Ashbourne Street, 7 p.m. The choice of venue was a strategic masterstroke of pathetic fallacy. Dinah's was a relic from another era, a place of cracked red vinyl booths, sticky formica tables, and a perpetual, lingering smell of burnt coffee and stale grease. It was the place you went for a regrettable late-night meal, not a family summit. By choosing this place, they were attempting to strip away the corporate armor, to drag me from the gleaming towers of Harbor and Finch back to the humble, gritty reality of our shared past. They were trying to remind me that before I was a director of corporate integrity, I was their daughter, Ellie. It was a clumsy, transparent gambit. I arrived exactly at 7. They were already there, huddled together in a booth by the window, looking profoundly out of place. My father's expensive suit looked funereal under the buzzing fluorescent lights. My mother, who was never seen without her pearls and perfectly coiffed hair, looked small and frayed, her designer handbag placed on the seat beside her as if she were afraid to let it touch the floor. They both looked 10 years older than they had at the housewarming party. The arrogant confidence was gone, replaced by a brittle, hollowed-out desperation. I slid into the booth opposite them. A waitress with tired eyes slapped down a menu in front of me. I pushed it aside. "I'm not eating." My father cleared his throat, gathering himself. He was attempting to project the same paternal authority he had always relied on, but his voice was thin, lacking its usual resonant command. "Eleanor," he began, using my full name as he always did when he was about to issue an edict. "We've had some time to think. Your brother, Mason, has made a mistake, a serious one. We acknowledge that." "A mistake?" I repeated, my voice flat. "A mistake is forgetting to lock the car. What Mason did was commit multiple federal crimes." My mother flinched, but my father pressed on, ignoring me. "He's prepared to make it right. He will find a way to repay every cent. We will mortgage the house if we have to. The important thing is that we handle this as a family, quietly." Here it was, the bargain, the final, desperate offer from a position of absolute weakness. "We've come up with a solution," he continued, leaning forward, his eyes pleading. "You go to your superiors. You tell them you've reviewed the situation, that it was an internal accounting error, a misunderstanding. You withdraw your report. Mason makes restitution. And the family can remain intact." I let the proposal hang in the air, thick and cloying as the smell of the diner's fryer. They were asking me to commit a felony, obstruction of justice, to save the man who tried to make me the scapegoat for his own felonies. The logic was so warped, so steeped in their self-serving worldview, that it was almost breathtaking. They still believed this was something that could be handled, a messy bit of family business to be swept under the rug. Slowly, I reached into my bag and took out a small, leather-bound notebook and a pen. It was the journal where I kept my personal notes, my timelines, my checklists. I opened it to a bookmarked page. I didn't need to read it. I had the words memorized. But the gesture was for them. I pushed the notebook across the sticky table. "You're a little late for that," I said. According to Title 18 of the U.S. Code, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002 provides federal protection for whistleblowers who report suspected corporate fraud to a federal agency or a supervisor. The moment I uploaded that evidence to the immutable archive and filed the anonymous report, a legal process was triggered that I have no power to stop, even if I wanted to, which I don't. I tapped a date I had circled in red ink on the page. That's the timestamp from the compliance server. It's a sealed, legal record. Withdrawing it now would be like trying to unfire a bullet. My father stared at the notebook, his face a mask of confusion. He was a man who understood balance sheets and interest rates, but the absolute, unforgiving language of federal law was a foreign tongue. He was out of his depth. My mother, however, understood emotional warfare. When logic failed, she always resorted to character assassination. She leaned forward, her voice a venomous whisper that was more piercing than any shout. "You always were, weren't you?" she hissed, her eyes glittering with a strange mixture of tears and malice. "You were always jealous of him, of his charm, of his success. You could never stand to see him shine. This isn't about the law, Eleanor. This is about you finally finding a way to tear him down." The accusation, which would have once wounded me to the core, now felt pathetic. It was the last, rusted weapon in her arsenal. I looked at her, my expression calm, almost clinical. "Jealousy?" I asked, my voice genuinely curious. I tilted my head. Was I jealous of the SEC's Division of Enforcement? Am I envious of the federal sentencing guidelines? You're talking about feelings. Mother, I am talking about statutes. They are not the same thing. I closed the notebook and put it back in my bag. The finality of the actions seemed to crush the last bit of fight out of them. My father slumped back against the vinyl booth, a deep, shuddering sigh escaping his lips. He looked defeated. "We just wanted you both to be safe," he murmured, his voice thick with a sorrow that might have been genuine. "That's all we ever wanted." This, more than the jealousy charge, angered me. This invocation of protection, of parental concern, it was the ultimate hypocrisy. "Safe?" I asked, and this time, the cold control in my voice cracked, allowing a sliver of the ice-cold fury beneath to show through. "Was Mason safe when you encouraged him to believe that rules were for other people? Were his clients safe when you helped him steal their money? Is safety a 4-bedroom mansion built on a foundation of lies and other people's life savings?" I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a low, intense whisper. "Don't you dare talk to me about safety. You didn't raise a son, you raised a liability, and the bill has come due." They had no answer to that. They just looked at each other, and in that shared glance, I saw the last vestiges of their pride, the glorious, arrogant confidence from the night of the party, shatter into a million pieces. The beautiful porcelain image of their perfect family had been smashed on the greasy floor of a cheap diner, and they were only now seeing the shards. The waitress returned, holding a pot of coffee. "You folks ready to order something?" "Just the check," I said. When she brought it, I didn't hesitate. I took out my new corporate credit card. I signed the slip, added a generous tip, and selected the business expense option on the form. I took my copy of the receipt, and before putting it away, I slid it across the table for them to see. I circled the pre-printed line item at the bottom, "Guest Entertainment." They stared at the receipt, at the official Harbor & Finch logo, at my signature. They were my guests. This meal, this final, disastrous negotiation, was a business expense according to the strict, transparent rules of my new role. "Every dollar has a path," I said quietly, taking the receipt back. "It has to be accounted for, every single one." I stood up, my bag in my hand. "My path is straight. I suggest you find one of your own." I left them there, sitting in the booth under the harsh fluorescent lights. I didn't look back. As I pushed open the glass door and walked out into the cool night air, I could still feel the residue of my mother's perfume, a scent that had always smelled of expensive, suffocating control. I imagined it lingering in the booth, its floral notes battling with the smell of burnt coffee, before finally, inevitably, fading away on the cheap, red vinyl. The final report from the external auditors landed on my desk with the quiet, definitive weight of a tombstone. It was a thick, spiral-bound document, its cover a bland corporate blue that belied the devastation within. I didn't need to read it. I had lived it. I had written its first draft in the form of a black binder, but I opened it anyway, out of a sense of professional duty, a need to see the process through to its final documented conclusion. The language was exactly as I knew it would be, sterile, precise, and utterly damning. It was stripped of all human drama, a clinical autopsy of a financial crime, page after page of spreadsheets, transaction analyses, and email excerpts were summarized in cold, bullet-pointed findings. There was no mention of family, of betrayal, of a housewarming party, or a desperate confrontation in a marble kitchen. There was only the data, laid bare and irrefutable. The last page was a single sheet titled, Summary and Recommendations. It was brutally concise. Finding: material and willful violation of fiduciary duties, including misappropriation of client funds and deliberate falsification of corporate records by senior investment analyst Mason Vale. Finding: evidence of a coordinated conspiracy involving external entity, Blue Spire Solutions, co-signed by a direct family member, to launder embezzled funds. Recommendation: immediate termination of employment for cause. Recommendation: referral of the complete case file, including all internal findings, to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Department of Justice for criminal investigation. I closed the report. There was no joy, no surge of triumph. There was only the quiet, profound hum of a complex machine reaching the end of its cycle. The system I had put my faith in had worked. The ledger had not lied. The special board meeting to formally accept the report's findings was a somber, perfunctory affair. It was held in Rivengate, but the room felt different now. The dramatic tension of our last meeting was gone. Replaced by a grim procedural solemnity, the vote was a formality, a quiet show of hands around the obsidian table. It was unanimous. When it was over, Chairman Sterling caught my eye from across the table. He didn't smile. His face was etched with the weary gravity of a man who had seen too many promising careers end in disgrace. "You kept the ship steady, Vale," he said, his voice a low rumble. "The firm is in your debt." It was the highest praise I could have received, and it was entirely professional. He was thanking an officer of his company for protecting its integrity. It was exactly what I wanted. I was not the vengeful sister. I was a competent director. Later that day, Marcus Thorne from Legal brought the final process completion form to my new office. It was a single page, a bureaucratic epilogue to the entire saga. It required my signature to certify that all internal review protocols had been followed and that the case was now officially closed from my department's perspective. I picked up my pen, the same simple ballpoint I had used to build my career. My hand did not tremble. I signed my name, Eleanor Vale, on the line. The ink was a dark, definitive blue. It was not an act of vengeance, nor of forgiveness. It was an act of completion. A file was being closed. A box was being checked. I saw him one last time. I was walking down the main corridor toward the elevators when he came out of a side office, a small cardboard box of personal effects in his hands. It was Mason. Security was escorting him out of the building. A quiet, humiliating final walk. He looked smaller, diminished. The tailored suit that had once seemed a second skin now hung on him, a costume for a part he no longer played. His face was pale and drawn. He didn't see me at first. His gaze fixed on the floor in front of him. The tie, a silk flag of his former arrogance, was now pulled loose at his throat, a symbol of his surrender. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. There was no anger in his gaze, no hatred, There was nothing at all, just a vast, empty landscape of shame. He looked away immediately, his head sinking lower, and walked past me without a word, a ghost in a well-tailored suit, haunting the scene of his own demise. I did not speak to him. There was nothing left to say, but after he was gone, I went down to the front reception desk. I took a plain white envelope from my bag and gave it to the security guard. "Could you please see that this gets to Mr. Vale?" Inside was not a note. It was a printed list of the city's top white-collar criminal defense attorneys who offered pro bono or reduced-fee initial consultations. It was the last thing I would ever do for him as a sister, a final, detached act of logistical support. The rest was up to him, as a man. My last official action on the matter was a company-wide email. It was sent from my new address, from the office of the Director of Corporate Integrity. The subject line was simple: moving forward. "Team," I wrote. "The recent internal review has now concluded. Harbor and Finch is moving forward. Our strength as a firm is not defined by an absence of mistakes, but by our response to them. We do not fix errors by assigning blame. We fix them by building better systems of transparency, accountability, and integrity that make such errors impossible to repeat. In the coming weeks, my office will be rolling out a series of new protocols. I look forward to working with all of you to build a stronger, more resilient Harbor and Finch." I hit send. It was a statement of purpose, my purpose. That evening, in the quiet of my own apartment, I performed the final, personal rituals of closure. I took out my phone and found the one picture I had taken at the housewarming party. It was a wide shot of the mansion, blazing with light against the twilight sky, a symbol of a lie. I held my thumb over the image for a long moment. A single tap, and a pop-up asked for confirmation. "Delete this photo?" I pressed delete. The lie vanished. I took the black binder from my briefcase. I opened it and slid out the thick stack of papers, the copies of the evidence I had printed. I walked to the high-capacity shredder in my home office and fed the pages in, one by one. The machine whined, chewing up the transaction logs, the bank statements, the incriminating emails, turning the story of my family's downfall into a cascade of meaningless confetti. The official evidence was secure in the company's archive. These copies were just ghosts, and it was time for them to go. I placed the empty black binder on the corner of my desk. It was no longer a weapon. It was a relic, a souvenir from a war no one else knew had been fought. Outside, a soft rain had begun to fall, whispering against the windows of my high-rise apartment. It streaked down the glass, washing over the glittering lights of Candle Row. I imagined the rain falling on the invisible dust of a shattered illusion, cleaning the air. My phone vibrated on the desk, a text message. It was from my mother. The words on the screen were so mundane, so absurdly normal, that they felt like a message from a different universe. "Are you coming for dinner?" I stared at the text, a faint signal from a distant, dying star. An invitation back to a world whose rules I no longer followed, whose language I no longer spoke. I did not feel anger, or sadness, or even pity. I felt nothing. It was just a query, a data point from an obsolete system. I did not reply. I placed the phone face down on the desk. I walked to the large window, unlatched it, and pushed it open. A cool, clean breeze, smelling of wet pavement and the vast, open sky, swept into the room, filling my lungs, and I stood there for a long time, just breathing. The next morning, I returned to the 40th floor. I didn't have a meeting. I didn't have a reason to be there, not one that would appear on any official schedule. But I was drawn back to the scene, to the quiet, glass-walled room where the story had finally been given its proper ending. I was drawn back to Rivengate. The room was empty, scrubbed clean of the previous day's psychic residue. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, striking the long obsidian table at a low angle. The surface, so dark and polished, it seemed to drink the light, was now a mirror, reflecting the pale gold of the morning sky. It was no longer a battlefield or a runway. It was a river of light, perfectly still, a silent testament to the storm that had passed. I stood in the doorway for a long time, just looking. The silence was absolute, a clean slate. This room had been the stage for the destruction of my family, but it was also the crucible in which I had been forged into something new, something solid, something entirely my own. I walked to the head of the table, to the exact spot where Mason had stood, so full of a confidence he had not earned. My reflection moved with me across the table's surface, a solitary figure in a vast, empty space. I reached into my jacket pocket and my fingers closed around a familiar object. It was a pen, a simple, black, corporate-issue ballpoint, identical to 1,000 others in the building, but this one was different. This was the one he had tried to hand me, the one my parents had willed me to take, the one they believed held the power to bend reality to their will. It was meant to be the instrument of my compliance, the tool with which I would sign away my name, my career, and my soul. I held it in my hand, feeling its insignificant weight. It was just plastic and ink. Its power was never in the object itself, but in the intent behind the hand that wielded it. From my briefcase, I took out a single, pristine sheet of paper. It was thick, creamy cardstock, embossed with the Harbor and Finch logo at the top. Below it, in a clean, sans serif font, was a title: The Harbor and Finch Charter of Integrity. It was the first official document issued by my new office. It wasn't a dense legal text filled with subclauses and loopholes. It was a statement of principles, a declaration of intent. It spoke of transparency, of fiduciary duty, of accountability, and of the fundamental truth that our reputation was our only non-negotiable asset. It was a promise to our clients, to our shareholders, and to ourselves. It was the constitution for the new era I was determined to build. I laid the charter on the polished table, directly in the path of a sunbeam. I took the pen, my brother's pen, and with a small, sharp click, I uncapped it. I positioned the nib over the signature line at the bottom of the page. This was the moment, the final act. I was not signing a document to conceal a lie, but to affirm a truth. I was not using my name to protect a fraud, but to underwrite a promise. I lowered the pen to the paper. The ink flowed, a rich, dark blue against the creamy white. My signature was not the hesitant, looping script of Ellie Vale, the dutiful daughter. It was the firm, clear, angular signature of Eleanor Vale, the director of corporate integrity. The line was straight. The letters were precise. My hand did not shake. It was the calmest I had felt in my entire life. I was not destroying a family. I was defining myself. I signed the right thing. The ink dried almost instantly in the warm sunlight. I held the cap of the pen over the tip, and with another decisive click, I closed it. My business with this pen, with the world it represented, was finished. I slipped it back into my pocket. I folded the charter once, carefully, and placed it in my briefcase. Then I turned and walked away from the table, away from the river of light and the ghosts of the past. My heels made a soft, rhythmic tapping on the polished stone floor of the long, empty corridor. Tap, tap, tap. It was not the frantic, panicked sound of my brother's finger against the table. It was the steady, measured cadence of a woman with a purpose, a woman walking in a straight line toward a known destination. As I neared the main atrium, the soft chime of an elevator arriving echoed in the hall. The stainless steel doors slid open, and a group of young employees spilled out. They were analysts and associates, in their mid-20s, laughing over some shared joke. They were carrying stacks of files, their arms full of the day's work. Their faces were bright with an easy, uncomplicated ambition. They were the future of this company. They were the ones I had, in some small, abstract way, done this for. They walked past me, a river of life and potential, oblivious to my presence, unaware of the battle that had been fought in the silent boardroom behind me. They didn't know that the foundation they were building their careers on had been fractured and was now being repaired. They didn't need to know. And as I watched them go, a profound sense of clarity settled over me. I had chosen my side. My loyalty was not to a name, not to a shared history of curated photographs and quiet resentments. My loyalty was to this, to the integrity of the system, to the promise that the clean, orderly files in their arms actually meant something. I had not lost a family. I had simply accepted that I had never really been a part of it. My real place was here, a guardian at the gates they didn't even know needed guarding. There was no applause. There were no words of gratitude from a rescued populace. There was no grand, cinematic swell of music. There was only the quiet hum of the building's ventilation system and the distant, muffled sound of a city at work. My victory was silent, internal, and absolute. It needed no witnesses. It required no further explanation. I walked straight toward the massive glass walls of the building's entrance. The morning light was brilliant now, a physical presence that washed over me, warming my shoulders. It felt like absolution. For a final, fleeting moment, I caught my own reflection in the glass, and for a split second, superimposed over my face, was the reflection of the silver letters etched into the granite archway outside. Harbor and Finch. It was not a brand. It was my name now. The automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh of air. I stepped outside, into the light, and did not look back. Thank you for listening to this story. If you've enjoyed it, I'd love to hear from you. Please comment below and let me know where in the world you're listening from, so we can connect and share our thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and show your support by hitting the hype button. It truly helps get the story heard by more people.